Order. Let me begin by expressing condolences to my distinguished ranking member for the loss of life in Iowa when a tornado that was described as apocalyptic touched down and caused considerable death and destruction. Today we have a different topic.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We address how climate change is making droughts more severe, which magnifies so many of the other risks that we've talked about in this committee. Climate change exacerbates the severity of droughts. Major agricultural regions like the American West and the Mediterranean are seeing less precipitation. Many places around the world are whiplashed by wild swings between drought and deluge. Almost everywhere is experiencing increased heat. The most straightforward of these is increased heat. Hotter weather means higher demand for water, to drink, to support agriculture, even to cool power plants. But without cold winters, less snowfall accumulates in mountains, and there's less runoff into streams, rivers, and watersheds during the summer months. Snowpack across the American West is down almost 25% since 1955. As temperatures go up, the pace of water returning to the atmosphere from soils and plants also goes up. Global warming is turbocharging evaporation and transpiration. Without water, the agricultural industry suffers. Manufacturing slows, communities empty out, and real estate values can plummet. The costs of running out of water can be existential. Since 1980, 31 droughts have cost the nation an average of $11.6 billion each in physical and economic damages, notably not counting loss of life and other non-monetary harms. But the true costs of drought are more systemic and amplify dangers this committee has heard about. Hot, dry weather increases the risk of wildfires. These fires, along with climate-driven flood risks, are creating an insurance crisis that The Economist says could cause a $25 trillion hit to global property values. This was their cover article 2 issues ago, and I commend it to anyone who is interested. Worsening droughts threaten national security. Droughts have contributed to conflict and instability in Syria, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The United Nations estimates that 1.84 billion people worldwide, nearly a quarter of humanity, lived under drought conditions between 2022 and 2023, the vast majority in low and middle income countries. Droughts also jeopardize some of the world's most important waterways and reduce food production, raising prices in grocery aisles. Years of drought depleted the Panama Canal, cutting ship traffic in this major thoroughfare by nearly 40%. An intense Mediterranean drought caused global olive oil prices to rise 130% in 2023. The former executive director of agri-giant Cargill warned that as a result of climate change, and I'm quoting him here, U.S. production of corn, soybeans, wheat, and cotton could decline by 14% by mid-century and by as much as 42% by late century. Our infrastructure, the foundation of our economy, is also harmed. Glen Canyon Dam's electric power generating infrastructure has been damaged by low water levels. New and expanded reservoirs, channels, even desalination plants could be needed to make up water loss. Much of this infrastructure will likely be funded by the federal government. And more infrastructure means higher capital and operating costs, so utility companies will raise rates, putting the burden ultimately on households and businesses. Climateflation flows downstream. As droughts worsen, some places just won't have the water to meet demand, creating hard choices likely to fall most heavily on farmers and low-income households. Development options will wither in places where increased aridity leads to real water scarcity. Even communities that rely on oil and gas for tax revenue should be concerned about the risks of drought, as water supports fossil fuel production and cools fossil fuel power plants. Water shortage can lead to stranded assets for companies and a declining tax base for communities. Today, we'll hear about the crisis of water scarcity from 3 different witnesses who all face the same fundamental challenge. How do we make do with less? The hard choices and mounting costs associated with water scarcity are the result of decades of negligence on climate. We have a chance still to make a different decision, and I hope we will. Recognize Senator Grassley.
First of all, I thank you for recognizing the tragedy that happened in Greenfield, Iowa. Probably, if you were watching morning television that's national, you would have seen it on television this very morning. So before we start, since the Senate is in session and I can't be in Iowa, I want to share my my thoughts are with the people of Iowa during these troubled times, especially those in Adair County. My staff is on the ground right now in Greenfield touring unimaginable destruction from storms yesterday. I want to commend the first responders and emergency managers for their caring and humane work. I stand ready to help as our communities recover. Sadly, several fatalities have been reported, so Barbara and I are praying for the families who have lost loved ones and for those who have lost their homes and businesses so unexpectedly. To the subject of today's hearing, as with the previous 17 hearings, I've invited qualified scientists to provide a reasoned view on the very real challenges that we face as a result of changing climate. I welcome Dr. Pilkey to the committee, formerly a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. He'll tell us how the International Panel on Climate Change is uncertain as to the impact of climate change on drought. In fact, the IPCC has not detected strong trends in any of the three types of drought: meteorological, agricultural, or hydrological, in any region of the entire world. I also look forward to hearing from Dr. Castellano from Iowa State Department of Agronomy. The doctor's extensive work on soil composition shows us that there's no reason why farmers can't adapt to climate change, preserve our environmental health, and turn a profit at the same time. Rather than speculate on climate change doomsday, we Iowans prefer to confront problems head on. Drought is a problem that we know better than most Americans. I keep track of rain levels each week when I go home to the Grassley farm. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit an article titled, quote, "The Importance of Distinguishing Climate Science from Climate Activism," end of quote, by Dr. Bunchen of the University of Cambridge, and put that in the record.
Without objection.
He's worried about activists who pretend to be scientists, and we should all make sure that we're following sound science. He hit the nail on the head when he wrote, quote, "Activists often adopt scientific arguments as a source of moral legitimation for their movements, which can be radical and destructive rather than rational and constructive," end of quote. We've seen our fair share of activists testify before the Budget Committee on matters well outside of what this committee was set up to do. I welcome all of our witnesses today.
Thank you very much. We have 5 witnesses today, including witnesses from New Mexico and California and Oregon, who will be introduced by their senators. The first is Ms. Trujillo. Welcome, Tanya Trujillo. And Senator Lujan, you have the floor to introduce your witness.
Well, good morning, Chairman, and to our ranking member. And thank you for holding this important hearing on the risks that worsening droughts have on our economy and our budget. Today, I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce my good friend and fellow New Mexican, Tanya Trujillo. I always feel grateful when New Mexicans appear before our committee, sharing their expertise with our committee colleagues to answer questions, to tough questions, and especially providing a perspective with more extreme drought conditions. New Mexicans know drought like few others. We've lived in it for centuries, mastering innovative techniques to conserve precious water resources and protect diverse wetland ecosystems. Water is New Mexico's way of life, the foundation for the food we eat, the businesses we create, and the cultural traditions we pass on. Ms. Trujillo's testimony will illustrate the challenges facing water managers in the Southwest in dealing with extreme drought. But it's not just New Mexico seeing these impacts on our economy. As Tanya will make clear, the future of our nation's water supply can no longer depend on lessons from the past. States are losing the tools they have relied on for a long time to anticipate future supply and manage competing needs. In the end, it will be all water users, consumers, businesses, farmers and ranchers, and more that will bear the brunt of these decisions in higher costs and reduced supply. Ms. Trujillo also brings this committee her decades of experience on water litigation, professional development, support, along with her tireless public service to our country. As Assistant Secretary to the Department of Interior for Water and Science, Ms. Trujillo oversaw key agencies responsible for the sustainable management and development of our freshwater resources. She now serves as Water Policy Advisor for the Office of New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, where I am glad her talents will be used to help New Mexicans secure their water future. Thank you again, Chairman Whitehouse and Ranking Member Grassley, for this opportunity to introduce our witness. I look forward to hearing from Ms. Trujillo and the rest of our witnesses.
Thanks very much, Senator Lujan. Our next witness is Mr. Adel Hashkhalil, who will be introduced by Senator Padilla of California. You have the floor to make your introduction, Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly my pleasure to introduce my friend and our witness today, Mr. Adel Hashkhalil, a fellow engineer, a fellow Angelino, a fellow son of immigrants. Mr. Hashkhalil is the General Manager and Chief Executive Officer for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the largest wholesale drinking water supplier in the country that provides water to 26 member public agencies, which collectively serve roughly 5%, not just of the Los Angeles population, not of the California population, 5% of our nation's population. Roughly 19 million people rely on the Metropolitan Water District. And just to put that into context for my colleagues, that's more people served by his agency alone than the entire population of every other state represented on this dais. Under Mr. Hashkhalil's leadership, Metropolitan is entering a new era of sustainability and resiliency in the face of climate change and other threats to Southern California's water reliability. Before joining Metropolitan, he was the Executive Director and General Manager of the City of Los Angeles' Bureau of Street Services, where he worked to integrate climate adaptation into the largest municipal street system in the nation. I first came to know Adel when he was Assistant General Manager of the Los Angeles Bureau of Sanitation. There are few water managers anywhere in the country, and I'd argue in the world, who have more experience with and better understand the impacts of more extreme droughts on water utilities and their budgets, and what drought-impacted utilities are doing to adapt their water supplies and infrastructure to meet our drinking water and sanitation needs. And as Mr. Hashkhalil and I have spent a lot of time collaborating on him, he has been laser-focused on what all this means for household water rates, and especially for low-income communities' water rates. So I want to thank Mr. Hashkhalil for flying here from Los Angeles to participate today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this critical meeting.
Thank you very much, Senator Padilla. Our next witness is Mr. Kevin Richards from Oregon, who will be introduced by his fellow Oregonian, Senator Merkley. Senator, you have the floor to make your introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm delighted that Kevin Richards is here, accompanied by his two sons, to share his on-the-ground experience of farming in our home state. Our farmers in Oregon are facing immense challenges. The West is in the midst of a historic drought. Demands of our water have never been higher, while water levels have never been lower. And climate chaos is making our summers hotter, drier, and longer. In Oregon, as temperatures have climbed, the average snowpack in the Cascade Mountains has dropped an average of more than 20 feet over the last 90 years. That means less water for our streams, less water for our farmers, and less water for our ranchers. And the supply of snowmelt runs out earlier in the spring or summer than in the past. Farmers across Oregon have been grappling with these challenges. One of those farmers is our Kevin Richards from Fox Hollow Ranch in Madras, Oregon. He's a second-generation farmer. His family specializes in growing seed crops like carrots and Kentucky bluegrass. He also grows peppermint oil, wheat, alfalfa, hay. Before Mr. Richards dug into the soil of Jefferson County, he fought for our farmers here in Washington, D.C. as Director of Regulatory Relations for the American Farm Bureau Federation. And he's felt the effects of this prolonged drought in Central Oregon firsthand. Last summer, he was among hundreds of farmers who received only half as much water as usual, which means, of course, fewer crops and less income. To address the shortage of water, Mr. Richards has invested in irrigation modernization programs like drip irrigation and wireless irrigation monitoring to improve the efficiency of his farms. To ensure the crops we need and more farmland doesn't fall fallow, it's vital that we support our family farmers like Mr. Richards. It's also important that irrigation districts increase efficiency in their delivery of water. That's why I worked across the aisle with former Senator Thad Cochran of Mississippi to revive the Department of Agriculture's Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program, known back home as PL 566, to invest in irrigation modernization projects, specifically the piping of irrigation districts to decrease the loss both to the ground and to evaporation. We need many more of these investments across Oregon and across the West so that in the future, Mr. Richards can pass on his Fox Hollow family farm to his sons like his father passed it on to him. It's a pleasure to welcome him here today. Good to have you.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. After Mr. Richards, we'll hear from Dr. Michael Castellano, who is an associate professor and William T. Frankenberger Professor of Soil Science in the Department of Agronomy at Iowa State University. Let me extend my condolences to you as well as an Iowan. He participates in the university's environmental science, sustainable agriculture, and ecology and evolutionary biology interdepartmental graduate degree programs. His research focuses on the nitrogen cycle and ways it can be made more efficient and sustainable. Last, we have Dr. Roger Pilkey, who has been on the faculty of the University of Colorado Boulder since 2001, where he teaches and writes on a diverse range of policy and governance issues related to science, technology, environment, innovation, and sports. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on science and technology policy, the politicization of science, government science advice, and energy and climate. Mr. Hillo, we will begin with you. You have 5 minutes to make your opening statement, and your complete statement, like that of all the other witnesses, will be made a matter of record. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify on this important subject. Thank you, Senator Lujan, for the introduction, and thank you, Senator Grassley, for looking out for the Iowans. My mom lives in Des Moines, and I'm happy to say hello to her today. As a Western water manager from an arid state, I am keenly aware of the need to be prepared for future drought conditions. On today's drought monitor map, unfortunately, New Mexico takes the prize in a bad way, but many areas have seen improvement this year. 2 years ago, the drought monitor map painted a very different picture, with well over half the nation experiencing some of the worst drought conditions in recent history, and major reservoirs hit record low levels. Communities imposed drought restrictions on water use, and emergency actions were taken within the Colorado River Basin and California to protect infrastructure. In New Mexico, over 40 miles of the Rio Grande went dry, which had not been the case in over 40 years. Last October, on a return trip to Iowa City, I participated in a discussion regarding the severity of the ongoing drought there in Iowa. We know that drought conditions pose challenges for every sector of our economy. Farmers make planting decisions based on the availability of surface water and groundwater. Cities and towns have a responsibility to ensure their residents have water, regardless of the hydrology we are seeing. And we are aware of the cascading effects of drought through issues like wildfires, where smoke crosses state lines, and subsequent rainstorms can produce debris flows that can shut down highways or clog up water treatment facilities. Fortunately, we are working on these issues, and in many cases, we've been able to develop strategies to manage and adapt to the drought. We are also working in parallel on strategies to be able to store and capture water during wetter times, if those are the conditions that we see, and if we have the infrastructure available to do that. In New Mexico, like other Western states, we have made significant investments in infrastructure and water management programs, but we know we need to do more. In January, our Governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, released a 50-year water action plan. That plan identifies 11 drought response areas that we need to work on in order to enable New Mexicans to respond to the drier conditions that may be on the horizon. The 50-year water action plan is based on input received from technical experts and water users around the state, and it emphasizes the need to do more in water conservation among all sectors. It also recognizes the need to protect water quality and restore important watersheds, and to look to the future to develop new water supplies. All of the efforts in the plan will require sustained levels of funding and additional investments in infrastructure. We are grateful for the recent announcements of federal funding for water projects within New Mexico from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The new federal funding will be paired with state and local appropriations and will help our communities develop more efficient water delivery systems and create backup supplies for use during droughts. The existing funding is a good down payment for the additional funding that will be necessary to fully implement the required actions. Having strong partnerships is a key to all of these efforts. In New Mexico, we know we have to work closely with our water users to manage the limited supplies we have available. We also know we have to work closely with our sister states and continue to work with them on developing collaborative agreements for water sharing. We work, of course, very closely with the federal agencies who own and operate many of the large infrastructure projects, and it will be required to have as much flexibility as possible in those management decision-making processes to make sure we can get through the tough drought years that may be ahead. There's no doubt that the available funding works best when it can be utilized in conjunction with collaborative efforts among multiple water management agencies. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this hearing and describe some of the ways that New Mexico and its partners are responding to drought. The strategies and action under development will ensure that New Mexico's communities can continue to prosper even during drought or during whatever future conditions we may see on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trujillo. It's wonderful to have you with us. Let me turn now to Mr. Haj Khalil.
Thank you, Chair Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley. Appreciate the opportunity to testify before your committee. And also I want to extend my condolences to the families in Iowa, Senator Grassley. Also I want to thank Senator Padilla for the introduction and the partnership in uplifting communities everywhere, not only in California, but across this country. Thank you. Metropolitan is the largest wholesale drinking water provider in the United States. We are committed to providing safe, reliable water for all, with no one left behind. I repeat, with no one left behind. That's a commitment that we all have, that everyone should have the right for water. We represent 26 member agencies, including 14 cities, 12 water districts, serving water to over 19 million people and supplying water to support economy of $1.6 trillion. Water is life, water is economy. Metropolitan is renowned for our complex and integrated water systems and our commitment to water use efficiency. This combination of water reliability and water use efficiency have long worked together to sustain the well-being of our communities. Our water use today is the same as it was 50 years ago, with double the population, through over billions of dollars in investments in conservation. Half the water we use is locally sourced. This year, California and Metropolitan has conserved and added record amount of water in storage in Lake Mead. Metropolitan alone has added 1.7 million acre-feet of water in storage in Lake Mead, equivalent to 25 feet in elevation. Overall, we have 3.4 million acre-feet across in total storage in our system. That's equivalent to 3 years of imported water for our users in Southern California. Colorado River deliveries to the state in 2023 were the lowest since 1949. However, the challenges we face today are enormous. Water year 20 to 22 was the driest consecutive 3-year period in California. Notably, this extreme drought was immediately preceded by and followed by very wet years in 2019 and 23. Over the last 5 years, we have swung from record levels of water in storage to record-breaking drought conditions and back again. California has always had the most volatile year-to-year precipitation in the nation. But this rapid swing, as we call the climate whiplash, is unprecedented. We need new, adaptive, resilient water management practices and tools. The recent drought challenged our ability to reliably provide water to our service area. Metropolitan imports half of its water from Northern California via the State Water Project and from the Colorado River. During the last drought, our water deliveries were only enough for 6 areas in our region. We had to provide them human health and safety needs. Unfortunately, this low water allocation highlighted the vulnerability in our system in delivering water. 6 of our 26 member agencies that we serve, nearly 7 million people, were severely impacted by water shortage. As a result, Metropolitan and our member agencies, in partnership with our ag partners, implemented extraordinary conservation measures building on our past actions and partnerships. We launched an aggressive campaign that promoted water savings behaviors and invested $46 million in conservation rebates, landscape, and irrigation efficiency measures. We reoperated our distribution system to utilize as much stored water as possible and accelerated work on projects totaling hundreds of millions of dollars to re-engineer our existing water delivery system and improve our flexibility. We also accelerated investment in $200 million construction project for groundwater storage in Antelope Valley to allow use and us to store more water from the State Water Project south of the Delta and north of our service area. Additional storage and conveyance projects are also in the work. I want to acknowledge the partnership with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Commissioner Touton, and thank you for the federal investments are helping us move the needle on these investments. Even as California's precipitation becomes more erratic, drought conditions are putting pressure on the West overall and what we're looking at. New infrastructure to recycle, capture, move, and store water is needed to ensure the communities that we serve have reliable water supply. These include projects like Pure Water Southern California, the largest recycled water project in the country. We're recycling 150 million gallons a day, serving 3.4 million people. Metropolitan is developing climate adaptation master plan for water to provide roadmap to guide us into the future. Weather extremes has also have financial implications. Drought compels us to double down on conservation and efficiency investments and more resilient and climate-adaptive infrastructure. Metropolitan is currently evaluating new infrastructure projects to improve our climate resiliency, including the largest recycle project in the nation. Our capital investments we're looking at is about $30 billion in 2023 dollars. This is beyond what we can ask our ratepayers, but it's necessary to ensure they have safe and reliable drinking water for generations to come with no one left behind. Sustained federal assistance in the form of grants, new bond financing mechanism, and assistance to low-income households are essential as we work to build more resilient water systems and adapt to our changing climate, but all requires us to partner and work together across our watersheds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And we turn now to Mr. Kevin Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to share the challenges farmers face as we struggle to adapt to a changing climate characterized by drought and water scarcity in the western states. I farm about 1,000 acres with my family in the Central Oregon High Desert. We raise some livestock, hay, and grain. However, our farm in our region specializes in grass seed and vegetable seed production. In fact, the county where I farm produces the majority of the global carrot seed supply. Our region historically receives less than 10 inches of rain per year, so we rely on irrigation water. After in-stream water rights were exhausted in the 20th century, the Federal Bureau of Reclamation built reservoirs to capture winter snow runoff and divert stored water nearly 100 miles to 60,000 acres in North Unit Irrigation District, where I farm. Unfortunately, perennial drought has reduced allotments to as low as 20% of normal in recent years, and it would require multiple wet years to restore reservoir and water supply levels to their historic averages. How is drought impacting our farms and communities? Frankly, some farms simply cannot adapt fast enough. This spring, there have already been 3 auctions in our small community to liquidate farm equipment of multi-generational family farms who have made the difficult decision to quit. Less water means fewer crops and fewer jobs for farm workers and agriculture businesses. That is taking a toll on our local economy and employment. Our rural town has 3 major equipment supply dealers. One of those businesses decided to close their doors and relocate this winter. Our local school district is one of the most authentically diverse in the nation, with 1/3 of our students Native American from the Confederated Tribe of Warm Springs, and over 1/3 of our students from Hispanic American families who immigrated as farm workers. Irrigated agriculture is the economic engine that creates jobs and prosperity for these families, and everyone suffers when that engine starts to run out of fuel. A less obvious cost of drought is the impact on the local environment. When arable irrigated farmland is dried up, it creates micro-ecological disasters in the form of erosion, proliferation of noxious and invasive weeds, and soil degradation. Sustaining soil health helps maintain the beauty of our landscapes, and it is essential to farm productivity. But it is nearly impossible without adequate irrigation water or sufficient farm revenue to justify costly inputs. How are farms adapting to drought and water scarcity? All farms are desperately searching for ways to tighten their belts and find efficiencies. Unfortunately, short-term solutions often come with negative consequences. It's painful telling your loyal employee they no longer have a job. And sometimes cutting expenses leads to cutting corners and neglecting investments in maintaining soil health or deferring investments. Nevertheless, farmers like me who want to see American agriculture and our rural communities thrive are finding ways to adapt and invest in drought resiliency. We're adjusting our crop rotation and looking for opportunities to grow new high-value annual crops that allow for greater flexibility in our water use. We're pouring our resources into on-farm conservation by monitoring soil moisture, piping ditches, upgrading sprinklers to the latest technology, and converting to drip irrigation. What collective solutions are available to enhance drought resiliency? A robust farm safety net and risk management tools like those authorized through the Farm Bill are enormously helpful toward ensuring family farms can survive the risk and volatility in modern agriculture. Please continue to support those programs, as well as ways to adapt those programs to be more viable to the specialty crops that we grow in western states. However, some of the greatest opportunities to save water are not on the farm, but within our irrigation infrastructure. I urge your support for programs and funding that help to modernize irrigated agriculture in the West. As Senator Merkley highlighted, the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program, also known as PL 566, has been especially beneficial and used in novel ways to fund canal piping in Central Oregon and to make sure water diverted from rivers makes it to farmers' fields. Senator Merkley has been a champion of this effort in Central Oregon, and I'm grateful that he's leading a bipartisan effort to enhance the funding for PL 566, while taking a multi-benefit approach that targets not just water savings, but ecosystem improvements and cultural priorities. Projects funded through PL 566 and other investments in modernizing our infrastructure have a tremendous return on investment and deserve your support. Finally, we're in search of larger and more permanent solutions that will protect our rivers while preserving irrigated agriculture and the communities that depend on farming in Central Oregon. I've included in my written testimony more specifics on projects that we're pursuing that will help our irrigation district continue to thrive throughout the 21st century. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Richards. We now turn to Dr. Castellano.
Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. As an alumnus of the University of Rhode Island and a professor at Iowa State University, I feel very comfortable before this committee. I can safely say that I've worked with the best fishermen and farmers in the world. I'm an ecosystem science with particular expertise in the understanding and management of carbon, nitrogen, and water dynamics and agronomic systems. I work with a range of scientists, engineers, and most importantly, farmers to understand, design, and implement systems that minimize trade-offs between productivity and environmental performance. I'm currently the U.S. representative to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Soils, where I'm the lead author on the North American assessment of the forthcoming 2025 Status of the World Soils Report. Climate change is a serious risk. Weather variability, particularly precipitation extremes, create significant challenges for farmers. We should take steps to mitigate and adapt to climate change when and where it makes sense without slowing of the progress we've made towards improving the human condition, much of which is attributable to agriculture. In the last 50 years alone, we've doubled corn production per acre, the annual rate of yield gain shows no signs of declining, and the increase in production has been accompanied by significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Nevertheless, emissions from crop production are significant and among the most difficult to abate because, unlike other sectors, they're not from fossil fuel combustion. Instead, they're from nitrous oxide, a byproduct of processes that are critical for plant growth. Improved management of nitrogen and water are required to minimize agricultural emissions. Although agricultural emissions are hard to abate, there are strategies that increase yield while reducing emissions. Agronomic practices that explicitly aim to increase the amount and resilience of crop yield in an environmentally responsible manner are often overlooked by conservation programs, yet they can be extremely effective at adapting to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Today, I'd like to highlight two of these practices, subsurface drainage and crop residue management. More than 50 million acres of cropland across all 50 states benefit from subsurface drainage. This infrastructure includes connected networks of private and community-owned drainage pipes that can be valued at more than $50 billion. Subsurface drainage improves plant and soil health and allows farmers to make timely field operations that enable successful execution of additional conservation practices such as cover crops and reduced tillage and precision fertilizer management. Together, these factors reduce greenhouse gas emissions by increasing yield while reducing nitrogen fertilizer needs and nitrous oxide emissions. Although drains can promote nutrient runoff, they also enable edge-of-field treatment opportunities such as wetlands, which are among the most effective nutrient loss reduction practices and add diversity to the landscape. Unfortunately, much of our drainage infrastructure was installed more than 100 years ago, and it is deteriorating. In addition, capacity of our drainage infrastructure is no longer sufficient, owing in part to an increase in heavy precipitation in central and eastern U.S. The increase in heavy precipitation also reinforces another growing opportunity, the need for crop residue management. As I mentioned earlier, corn yield and the yield of many other crops is increasing every year, a great testament to farmer innovation and the success of U.S. investments in agricultural research. As yields increase, so do crop residues, the portions of the crop that are not typically harvested. Crop residue production in corn systems is increasing by about 100 pounds per acre every year. In the 1970s and 80s, crop residue retention was required to reduce erosion and build soil organic matter. However, the increase in residue production now creates significant challenges for farmers. The extra residue keeps the soil cold and wet, slowing the growth of subsequent crops and challenging the implementation of conservation practices such as reduced tillage and cover crops. The USDA Agricultural Research Service and land-grant universities have demonstrated that partial residue harvest in corn systems can increase yield, reduce nitrogen fertilizer needs, and reducing nitrous oxide emissions without risking loss of soil health. Hence, partial crop residue harvest can make significant reduction in the carbon intensity scores of U.S. agriculture. Moreover, the harvested residue can be transformed into renewable fuels that make significant contributions towards decarbonizing other hard-to-abate sectors of our economy. Better communication about the environmental benefits of drainage and crop residue management would ensure that farmers understand and act on them. Education, technical assistance, and incentive programs could accelerate the implementation and maximize the benefits of updating our drainage infrastructure and harvesting of crop residues for the decarbonization of agriculture and other sectors. It's clear that opportunities to reduce agricultural emissions can also contribute to productivity of our cropping systems and decarbonization of agriculture and other sectors. Going forward, we cannot and need not sacrifice productivity for climate change mitigation. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Dr. Castellano. Our final witness is Dr. Pelkey.
Chairman Whitehouse, Senator Grassley, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. For almost 30 years, along with many colleagues, I've studied extreme weather and climate and associated impacts. Our work has been cited in the most recent assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. The IPCC is comprised of hardworking and intelligent people who reflect a spirit of public service. They're also humans, and the IPCC is, of course, fallible. Conclusions of the IPCC reports are snapshots in time reflecting the evolution of scientific understandings. Individual experts may have legitimate views that are at odds with the IPCC, and that is, of course, expected in a diverse scientific landscape. I'm happy to report that the IPCC Working Group 1 assessments on the literature of extreme events in my areas of expertise have, with few exceptions, done an overall excellent job accurately reflecting the scientific literature. Today, I summarize what the most recent IPCC report concluded about the detection and attribution of trends in drought at the global scale and also for the United States. I start with some key IPCC terminology. First, detection. Quote, the process of demonstrating that climate or a system affected by climate has changed in some defined statistical sense without providing a reason for that change. An identified change is detected in observations if its likelihood of occurrence by chance due to internal variability is determined to be small. Attribution. Quote, the process of evaluating the relative contributions of multiple causal factors to a change or event with an assessment of confidence. Third, drought. Quote, periods of time with substantially below average moisture conditions, usually covering large areas during which limitations in water availability result in negative impacts for various components of natural systems and economic sectors. It is more challenging to achieve detection and attribution of trends in drought than, say, hurricanes or tornadoes, because drought can be defined and measured in many different ways in the context of significant natural climate variability. Detecting and attributing trends in drought impacts is even more challenging. It is very easy to identify drought trends over various time periods in various places that are the result of internal variability rather than an indication of a change in climate. Often, detection and attribution are confused, and so too is climate variability with climate change. The IPCC finds with high confidence, that's an 8 in 10 chance, that human-caused climate change influences the global hydrological cycle and thus drought. My written testimony makes 4 main points summarizing IPCC findings. Number 1, the IPCC focuses on 3 types of drought: meteorological, hydrological, and what it calls agricultural or ecological drought. First image. At the global scale, the IPCC has not detected or attributed trends in any of the 3 types of drought for any region with high confidence. That's an 8 in 10 chance. For the United States, which is summarized in the figure here, which is in my written testimony, the IPCC has only low confidence, that is a 2 in 10 chance, in detected or attributed trends in all 3 types of drought for all regions, with the exception of Western North America, where it has medium confidence, that's 5 in 10 chance, in the detection and attributions of trends in agricultural and ecological drought. Number 2. Looking forward to 2100, which is summarized in this figure, also in my written testimony, at the global scale, the IPCC does not expect that a signal of trends in drought will emerge in any region with high confidence. Again, that's an 8 in 10 chance. For the United States, the IPCC has only low confidence. Again, that's a 2 in 10 chance that a signal of trends in drought will emerge from the background of natural variability in all three types of drought for all regions, except Western and Central North America for agricultural and ecological drought, and also hydrological drought in Western North America. Both of those are at medium confidence, 5 in 10 chance. So I know that's a lot of words, but my written testimony includes several summary tables and figures from the IPCC reports that concisely summarize these IPCC findings and associated confidence levels. This is an image that comes from Chapter 11 of the IPCC. It's, I think, one of the last pages of the report. I encourage you to take a close look at it. In plain English, the IPCC concludes that changes to the climate system resulting from human activity, notably the emission of carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels, changes the hydrological cycle and thus affects drought. At the same time, the IPCC does not have high confidence that research has detected the signal of a change in past drought at the global scale or in the United States. Nor does the IPCC expect with high confidence such a signal to emerge beyond internal variability, even under its most extreme scenario, to 2100. Such uncertainties and areas of ignorance can inform both mitigation and adaptation policies and planning. Fourth, and my final point, to be absolutely clear, I emphasize explicitly and unequivocally that human-caused climate change poses significant risk to society and the environment, and that various policy responses in the form of mitigation and adaptation are necessary and make good sense. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Hearing you, Mr. Richards, reminds me a lot of conversations that I have with our fishermen in Rhode Island. I remember going out on a trawler one day just to see things firsthand and spend some time with the fishing captain who operates the trawler. And he turned to me and he said, "Sheldon, what you got to understand that this is not my grandfather's ocean." He'd grown up beginning to fish with his grandfather. Sounds to me like this is not your grandfather's land out in Oregon either.
I think that's right, Senator. As farmers, I think we do relate to fishermen and we consider ourselves stewards of resources. But one of those resources that we're stewards of is not just the water and the soil and the wildlife, but also the cultural heritage that is kind of the foundation of American agriculture and our resource industries like timber and our fisheries. And so, we're working hard not just to, save water and preserve the agriculture industry, but also to preserve the heritage of American farming.
Well, we hear very regularly from Senator Merkley about the foresters, farmers, and fishermen of Oregon. And Ms. Trujillo, you mentioned Governor Lujan Grisham's 50-year water action plan. Could you give us a little description of that plan and its foundation in science?
Yes, thank you, Senator. It is a report that the governor asked us to work on to really demonstrate the situation in New Mexico and the challenges that we may see if we do see a continued dry future. And what we used to inform the plan was a variety of information that came in from technical experts, including a report from 2022 that analyzed the impacts of climate change on our water resources. It was developed from a panel of primarily New Mexico scientists and researchers who had worked in the area for many decades, and they looked at a variety of situations from soil moisture impacts to groundwater recharge impacts, of course, surface water implications, trying to predict what we might see in the future, all tied together with an understanding that there is uncertainty and we don't know exactly what the future conditions are going to be. But if we see a drier future, and if we see the prediction that we may see up to 25% less water coming into our systems, we have to develop actions to respond to that. And so that's what this plan does. We have actions for water conservation in particular that are going to help us meet that supply and demand equation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hashkhalil, you mentioned that business models for water utilities are having to change in the face of climate change. Could you describe specifically how that's impacting the utility that you run and what the concerns are you see as you look forward?
Sure. I think to me it's the previous way of charging for water was about the consumption of water use, and most it was what we call telescopic water charging. So the more water you use, the more you pay. But what we're seeing right now is that we're actually incentivizing people. We're paying people to use less water, and we're investing a lot of money to whether it's through changing the landscape or conservation and farming, whether it's changing how you do that. And that's why our water use is 50%, half of the water we used 50 years ago. But for us to continue investing in this water resiliency, and what we need to do is build more storage, more conveyance, so we can capture wet water when we have it. And during dry conditions, we don't have to rely and fight over the water that we don't have. And to do that, we have to find new ways to charge for water without having to rely on the less amount of water we're selling. So our business model has to change. We need to find ways to generate revenue that is not based on the volumetric use of water. It has to be kind of a fixed rate that's built on the overall base and sharing in the cost, and also ensuring affordability for our communities. So we need to find ways where we reward people for conservation, address the affordability question. I appreciate Senator Pereira's leadership on the low-income assistance program. But I think what we need to do is how we can raise the money locally, because we appreciate the federal government's funding, but most of the money is going to come from the local investments and local rates. And how can we do it in a way that does not force people to use more water? So we're changing it now. And last month, our board of directors approved for the first time an increase in property tax to capture what we call the resiliency investments, to help us invest across the board in projects that can move us forward and reduce our dependence on the sale of water, because that's the new model that we have to do. And we are working through it, and we look forward to developing a new business model for Metropolitan and our region. But also it takes partnerships, and I appreciate the partnership with our partners on the Colorado River. Arizona and Nevada, for example, are partners with Metropolitan in Southern California in building the largest recycled water project, because if we invest together, we are helping each other reduce our dependence on imported water. So expanding the pie, making the intent bigger, and working together across the watershed and across the Southwest and across California, going to help all of us continue to move forward and be resilient.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. My time is up. Senator Grassley.
Dr. Castellano, how can farmers in Iowa and maybe states similar to Iowa improve their soil quality and limit emissions without demanding further input from the federal government?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator Grassley. I think the way that farmers go forward and limit their emissions and adapt and mitigate to climate change, improve soil without further dependence on the federal government, is taking a systems approach to things like cover crops and no-till. And when I say a systems approach, these practices, these conservation practices, which are named in the 40B, for example, they can't be prescribed indiscriminately because they just don't work everywhere. It's as simple as that. The science shows that on average, in fact, they may even reduce crop yields, yet when they're placed and targeted in proper systems, they can be very effective and do many great things for the environment. As I mentioned, subsurface drainage and crop residue management are two practices that help put that systems approach forward to allow other practices to go into the system better. That's where I see things going.
Okay, and also for you, are you more concerned with weather variability or drought in Iowa, and how can Iowans do best to, what they can do best to prepare so that there's more rainfall absorbance as opposed to runoff?
Sure. Thanks again for the question. As we heard from Dr. Pielke, the clear challenge here is variability in precipitation. And that's not just based on the science, but it's what we hear from the farmers. as well. There's big precipitation events, as we saw yesterday in Iowa, that are a major concern. We heard in the testimony here today about the ongoing drought in Iowa. That was punctuated by a May of this year, which through yesterday is the second greatest precipitation May on record. Farmers are doing things too, I want to add, to adapt to droughts. They did achieve very high yields in 3 of the 4 years during the sustained drought that we had in Iowa, including a record yield. And one of those 4 years, we saw a very low yield, and that was due to an extreme precipitation event, a derecho storm that you remember very well, Senator.
Dr. Pilkey, given your scientific expertise, I'd like to give you an opportunity, if you want to take advantage of it, to address any factually inaccurate science-based statements that were made today. And then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, thanks. We're in a period where there's a lot of what I would call anecdotal attribution. Something happened somewhere in the world. There was a tragic event in the skies over Southeast Asia yesterday, a turbulence event. And the news is covered with, oh, this is caused by climate change. And the quick attribution of everything that happens to climate change flattens our understandings. And these are very complex phenomena and processes. I learned 3 things in reading my colleague's testimony that are fascinating and I think tell a much more important part of the study. One is that the Southern California Water District uses half the water that it used to. That is an incredible story of human ingenuity and innovation. I have to follow up on that. The other is that most of the world's carrot seeds come from the high desert, which is another incredible testament. And then the third thing I learned is that crop productivity, despite all of the variability and change in climate over the past generation, since my grandparents were young people, has continued to increase and is expected to continue to increase.
And also, I'd like to have you, as my final question, Dr. Pilkey, to ask you why you've argued that, let's say, political liberals, rather than people in just one political party, are distancing themselves from the views of the International Panel on Climate Change.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you an anecdote. I was first invited to testify before the Senate 22 years ago. I think it was Environment and Public Works. And I was invited by Senate Democrats. And what they said to me was, would you come before the Senate and summarize what the recent, at that time, 3rd assessment report of the IPCC said? And so I did that. And then last week, I was invited by Senate Republicans to come with the exact same request. Could you come summarize what the IPCC says? My explanation of this is that at some point, climate proponents, climate activists decided to make extreme weather events the face of climate change. And in doing so, they went well beyond what the science can support. And so the IPCC is no longer particularly useful making those arguments, because as I said today, it pours some cold water on the anecdotal attribution claims.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Grassley.
All the panelists.
Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hill, thank you again for being here today, especially to share New Mexico's perspective with the committee. All New Mexicans understand drought, but the drought we are experiencing right now is different. It's longer, it's hotter, and it's less predictable. Just look at the Rio Grande River, which is not getting the attention that it deserves, especially with our brothers and sisters, including in New Mexico, who depend on the Colorado. In the legislation that this Congress passed, it also included the Rio Grande River. So that's my way of trying to get the Bureau of Reclamation's attention. Now, for generations, New Mexicans and the Rio Grande have worked in rhythm. Snowpack melting in the spring would help communities weather tough, dry periods in the summer. That has allowed the Rio Grande to sustain the region, providing a constant pulse of water that supports over 6 million people in agriculture and manufacturing industries across 2 countries. That's all changed. With increasing temperatures, snowpack is melting earlier and faster, forcing communities to use groundwater and deplete aquifers at critical levels. Mr. Hill, to protect water resources for generations to come, how does New Mexico plan to deal with rising temperatures, stronger drought, and less predictable precipitation?
Thank you, Senator, for your leadership and for your work on behalf of New Mexico. in New Mexico, we are always thinking about how to deal with the next drought situation and the ability to manage, as you said, in a complex system of surface water supplies and groundwater supplies that are interconnected. That ability for us to manage is going to be what we need to get us through the dry years. We are going to be also investing, as I said earlier, in the actions in the governor's 50-year water action plan. That mean we're going to have to do more conservation in municipalities, in agricultural communities, and on a system-wide basis. We're also going to have to look for new water supplies in the future if we continue to see the dry years on the horizon. And then, overarching everything, we have to make sure the water quality is protected. So all of those actions are on our mind every day as we're working to try to make sure we have water for our communities.
I appreciate that. Now, long-term drought is also fueling more intense, frequent, and unpredictable wildfires with costs that are felt for many years after the fire is extinguished. During recent common extreme drought conditions, small burns can rapidly evolve into mega fires, multiplying the cost of damages in the process. Now, that was the case in 2022 when the Forest Service lost control of a prescribed burn that grew into Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire, the largest in New Mexico's history. Among the impacts, billions of dollars in financial damages, hundreds of homes lost. The fire left behind burn scars in the watershed that serves 17,000 people in and around Las Vegas. When monsoon struck months later, the runoff flushed sediments and other wildfire debris into the city's reservoirs. The runoff was too contaminated for Las Vegas's only water treatment plant with no backup groundwater well running. It did not take long before supplies plummeted. Mr. Hill, how did the water crisis get so dire so fast in Las Vegas, New Mexico?
Thank you, Senator. And I was born in Las Vegas. My family's ranch land is in the burn area, and I appreciate your support and help and that of all of our delegation in providing resources and assistance to our community. The city of Las Vegas is similar to many other western cities or rural cities throughout the country where they are reliant on a single supply of water. And in this circumstance, unfortunately, that supply of water is fed by the watershed that was in the burn area. And their system was not able to handle the runoff and the debris that was coming through that area. The resources that we've been able to assist them with include trying to develop cooperative agreements, trying to improve the infrastructure there in the city to make sure they can provide water to their citizens. And it's something that many communities around the country should be thinking about if they are in a similar circumstance to Las Vegas. So thank you again for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Hyun. Mr. Chairman, I have several other questions. I'll submit them into the record as well. And thank you again for this important hearing.
Very well. Thank you very much. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's good to be here with you and my colleague from New Mexico. And I know a lot of you represent western parts of the country, but as you know, drought and water scarcity issues are not limited to the West. In my state of Maryland, climate change is causing more intense summer droughts and saltwater intrusion, which contributes to a growing water scarcity problem in our state. And what you're seeing is a lot of our communities are responding to try to remain more resilient. The city of Westminster, which is in Carroll County, Maryland, has initiated a project called Pure Water Westminster to study the safety and effectiveness of advanced treatment of reclaimed water for indirect potable reuse to augment surface water storage. And then in Anne Arundel County, a major county in Maryland, they're exploring the feasibility of large-scale groundwater replenishment efforts to protect against groundwater depletion. These are water recycling projects that also have secondary benefits because when you prevent that water from running off into the Chesapeake Bay, it obviously means that the bay doesn't face as many stresses. So we are looking at more and more innovative water recycling projects in Maryland as in other parts of the country. I worked hard with my colleagues to secure the inclusion of the Alternative Water Source Grants pilot program as part of the infrastructure bill. It's authorized, but we have not yet funded it, provided appropriations. So, Mr. Hajakil, could you just talk about the importance of these water recycling programs and how they're becoming more important because of the impact of climate change?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And I want to say is our success as a nation has to be through collaboration across the entire nation. And that's why it's important as water agencies and every utility is working together in collaboration under the associations, exchanging knowledge, experience, and what we need to do, because we can't reinvent the wheel. Next month, I'm actually going down to University of Colorado Boulder to talk about the future and how we do it. But as Governor Newsom, for example, developed his water supply action plan, and we know that 10% of the water supply in California is going to disappear. And what we need to do is manage risk, because water is so essential to our farmers. Water is so essential to our businesses and economy. And what we need to do is develop a risk-based approach. So we can't put all our eggs in one basket. So we need to diversify our portfolio, what I call the one water approach. And as you are looking at pure water in your community, we are looking at Pure Water Southern California. We need to diversify our water supply, and we need to find other sources of water that can augment it. So we're looking at recycling, building the largest recycled water project in Southern California, 150 million gallons a day, actually the largest recycled water project in the country. It's going to take water, treat the water that was going to go into the ocean and be wasted, recycling it and putting it in the ground. And now we have direct potable. That means we can put it upstream of our treatment plants. So during drought conditions, we're not fighting over that water. We're actually putting water away. And that can provide us a supply we need, not only for Southern California, but the entire state and the entire Colorado River watershed. By us working together in partnership and investing, and I appreciate the funding from the infrastructure bill that we have received and the Bureau of Reclamation's efforts on this, I think we need to diversify. So recycling is critical. Capturing wet water and storing it is critical. Building the infrastructure to move water around, and how we store water, whether it's underground or above ground. All these have to come together. What I call it's a holistic one water approach that we do it. But recycling is, with the technology we have, is safe, doable, and reliable source of water that when we have dry conditions, we can use that water to help continue the economy and continue the thriving of our communities across the board.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Many people, when they think of farming, also think of the Midwest. We have a very vibrant farming community in the state of Maryland, and saltwater intrusion is reducing the usable groundwater for our farmers who often lack a backup water supply that they can turn to. We know that this will get worse as we see, continue to see the impact of climate change. One of the programs that our farmers are using to try to remain resilient in their operations is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, to help farmers adapt. So, Mr. Richards, I was just wanted to get your thoughts on the importance of that as one of the tools to address these water issues.
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you for the question. The programs that are available, accessible for farmers through NRCS are tremendously helpful in incentivizing cover cropping and water and soil conservation efforts on farms, some of which were highlighted in other testimony today. They are very useful and beneficial. One challenge is they're not always available on an emergency basis when drought is threatening the soil health and kind of microecological disasters on neglected farmland. And so I believe there's an opportunity to enhance some of those programs and potentially make them available on a more emergency basis. And actually, our county piloted a program in 2022 to cost share and incentivize cover cropping and weed management on ground that was dried up due to drought to help avert some of the environmental disasters that were at risk. And so we're exploring ways to access grant funding through NRCS to build that program and make it more robust on a continuous basis.
Thanks for mentioning that. I look forward to working with my colleagues here as part of the Farm Bill reauthorization to see if we can fine-tune some of those programs to address these issues. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm told we have two senators on the way here, although one of the things that you learn quickly around the Senate is that you can never believe senators about where they are relative to where they're supposed to be. There's a legendary story of the cloakroom calling Ted Kennedy and saying, "We need you on this vote. Are you on your way?" "Yes," he said, "I'm at the airport," leaving out that he was at the Boston airport. So I will take just a moment, if you don't mind, Mr. Castellano, to ask you to elaborate a little bit on your statement. The potential to sustainably harvest a portion of crop residues is growing every year, representing a new source of feed, fiber, and fuel that can help to decarbonize other sectors of our economy. Could you elaborate on that sentence while we wait and see? Oh, and here we go. Look at that.
May I still elaborate, Senator Whitehouse?
You may elaborate.
Thank you.
Senator Romney's going to take a minute to get himself sorted out.
So, as I mentioned, crop residues, the production of them is growing every year as we increase yields. For corn, it's about 100 pounds per acre per year. That's a significant amount of residue. Those residues can be harvested and they can be turned into biofuels, renewable natural gas, for example.
Ethanol?
They can, yeah, they could be, but that would be more the grain. In our area in central Iowa, we have one plant, for example, Verbio, that is transforming the crop residues into renewable natural gas, and it's putting it directly into the pipeline. Not only, the big point here is that not only is that good, but removing part of the residue also reduces greenhouse gas emissions directly from the field to the atmosphere, which I pointed out is one of the hardest to abate sources of emissions in our economy writ large. And so there are multiple benefits for the farmer and other industries.
Great. Well, I will turn now to Senator Romney, because I already recognized him while the question finished. Senator Marshall will be next, and then Senator Padilla, should he return.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you all probably know, my state is one of those that has been experiencing a great deal of drought. I'm from the state of Utah. Estimates are that this is the longest period of drought in the last hundreds of years, going back to 1500. Last couple of winters, we've had some relief. This last winter, snowpack was about 114% of normal, but that doesn't begin to overwhelm the challenges that we've had over a longer period of time. The state has taken a lot of action to try and address that. The legislature has changed water rights legislation. They put in place a trust fund to buy water rights. Some localities like South Jordan are reusing water in ways that are novel and creative. But it continues to be a real challenge. I guess I had thought as a non-climate scientist that with all the warming, there'd be more rain and the things would get wetter. We keep on hearing about more storms and more violent storms and so forth. So wouldn't there be more water? Maybe there's more water in some places like Iowa or Nebraska or other places, but certainly in the American West, the Intermountain West, we're seeing a lot less water. And I guess the question is, how is and can agriculture adapt to that kind of change? And I mean, are you seeing it in other parts of the country? I'll turn to you, Mr. Richards, first. What can agriculture do in a setting where you don't know whether it's going to get wetter and wetter and wetter or drier and drier and drier? How do you accommodate that kind of disparity?
Senator, thank you for the question. The history of American agriculture is one of doing more with less. And so we're very good at adapting and finding ways to be more productive, more efficient with the resources that we have. And I think you're exactly right. It's not just scarcity, it's the variability and the unpredictability of water shortages. And so the questions I have is can farmers, family farmers who are just family businesses like my own, can we adapt fast enough? Can we change our business model, change our crop rotation, adjust how we're stewarding the soil and preparing it for the variability in the future? Can we do that fast enough? And so, as your colleague asked earlier, I think that there are programs within USDA, within NRCS that can enhance and incentivize some of that adaptation. On the ground, ultimately, though, we need investment in infrastructure, and not just to save water, but to manage it more collaboratively on basin-wide approaches, which some of my colleagues here at the table also mentioned. And so in Central Oregon, we're finding ways for irrigation districts and other water users who normally would operate in isolation to work together and manage things more collaboratively and invest in major projects that completely transform the way that we're using water.
Thank you. Mr. Castellano, in Iowa, what are you experiencing there in terms of climate, and to what degree are farmers and ranchers able to adjust?
Thank you for the question, Senator Romney. Just like yesterday in our state, it's precipitation extremes. That is the biggest challenge for us, and of course, variability from drought to precipitation excess as well. We have a drainage infrastructure in our state, just like every state in the United States does. We are using that drainage infrastructure to do things like drainage water recycling that we heard about earlier. We take the water that comes off the drains. Not only does that reduce nutrient loss downstream, which is a big concern for our Gulf of Mexico, as you're aware, so it mitigates that. It also can be fed back onto the system to benefit the crop productivity later in the year.
Thank you. I just note, Mr. Chairman, I think this is an important topic, and am happy to learn about it and ask questions and learn from these members of the panel. I would note that I think perhaps ENR would be the committee that would be focused on this more than budget. I'd hope that we in budget can deal with the $1.5 trillion deficit we have and trying to find some solutions to that. Because if we don't deal with that, we won't have the resources to be able to deal with emerging crises as they develop as a result of climate change and economic disruption of various kinds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you for accepting my invitation and coming in to discuss the prospects for reforms in healthcare that can significantly reduce those out-year expenditures. I was grateful that you took the time to come and join me during my office hours. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again to our panel for being here. Some of my questions may be redundant, so forgive me. As you would imagine, we're running back and forth to other committee hearings this morning as well. I'll start with Mr. Richards. Look, I'm a fifth-generation farm kid. I don't remember a time in my life when there wasn't some place in Kansas that was suffering from drought. And my grandparents would say the same thing, lived through the dirty 30s and this and that. And I think you all would agree with me that farmers and ranchers were the original conservationists. And given the tools and the flexibility, they're going to do what's right for the land and try to grow the most with the least possible. We're seeing great strides in precision agriculture. So many things are working good. And Mr. Richards, I assume that you use some of these conservation programs right now. How would you describe the flexibility portion of that? Are you able, do you feel like there's too many rules and regulations? Any concerns going forward?
Senator, thank you for the question. There's always opportunities to improve those programs. I do resemble your remarks in the sense that we're optimistic and we're always facing adversity and seeking ways to get better. The programs that exist are tremendously helpful through FSA, the safety net that exists. I would say, unfortunately, those programs tend to be catered more towards commodity crops. In the West, we focus more on specialty crops. And so often those programs don't work as well or are difficult to navigate for those of us in the Western state who grow smaller specialty crops. In terms of NRCS, similarly, those programs are very helpful in incentivizing conservation efforts, water and soil conservation, but often they don't work well on a short-term emergency basis. They're meant to or designed to incentivize paradigm shifts for farmers, but often, especially with drought, we need to adapt right away. And so,
thank you. Yeah, Dr. Castellano. Again, many of these practices that are now being forced upon us have been things we've been doing for decades. 1991, I remember starting doing no-till farming on our farm. Cover crops, that's something new. But there are certain places in Kansas where that doesn't work. In the western third of the state, there's simply not enough moisture to do cover crops. Wherever we can, we do no-till farming for a lot of reasons. A, it's economical, and B, it's also the great conservation. And here's my concern about the sustainable aviation fuel, that they're requiring all these climate practices be done. You know, it's like you can pick and choose, but again, there's just no way to do cover crops in the western half of the state. So do you have any concern that losing, that's the right thing to do, that we'll be losing some of the opportunities here by being required to adapt all these particulars?
Yes, Senator Marshall, I share your concern. I think it's a significant concern when we prescribe conservation practices without considering the system in which they're being placed. You made the anecdote about Kansas. I'll provide one about Iowa. No tillage often doesn't work in north central Iowa because it's too cold, it's too wet. We need to think about the full system. In those systems, which are flat, erosion's not a problem. We think about other ways to warm up and dry out the soil and to get the crop planted. I'd like to say, as you move towards rulemaking, towards the 45Z, that we have to be thinking about field scale analysis and accounting of greenhouse gas emissions and conservation practices, how they are effective in specific scenarios. That's the way we need to go.
Yeah, and I'm just as concerned about NRSC and FSA as whether it's the EQIP program, whatever program it is. If we're over-prescriptive, we're going to lose some of our farmers and ranchers because they can't do all of those things. But believe me, they would do them all if it's going to work. And last question, I'll stick with Dr. Castellano. Look, to do no-till farming, you have to have pesticides. You have to be able to kill the weeds and that type of thing. There's a lot of frustration in Kansas over the EPA, again, being over-prescriptive. That's going to prevent us from doing some of these conservation projects we've been doing decades. How are we doing in Iowa? Any concern about that?
In Iowa, we have some concerns. In fact, we have seen increases in tillage in places where no-till works because of a lack of herbicide availability, effective herbicide availability.
You got it. Yeah, it's too simple. Again, I think if we just give our farmers and ranchers the tools, they're going to do the right thing. What I see coming up in the next farm bills, we're being overly prescriptive. That very much concerns me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Marshall. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, there are a few places where the challenges of climate change, extreme weather, and fluctuations in precipitation are felt more acutely than in California. Now, the corresponding water scarcity, insecurity has created some really challenging circumstances and at times some intense conflict for water users in California. You can see it from the Klamath River Basin on the Oregon border to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and all the way down to the Colorado River and other places in between. That's why last Congress I fought so relentlessly to ensure that the Inflation Reduction Act included funding for Interior to help regions experiencing not just drought, but severe drought, and to drive collaborative solutions to perennial water conflicts. Now, just yesterday, I participated in a ceremony at the Department of Interior with some of our agricultural water users in the San Joaquin Valley to celebrate a historic agreement that leverages our IRA dollars to solve some of our trickiest water fights in the San Joaquin Valley. Mr. Haj Khalil, you've worked with Interior to leverage IRA investments to help alleviate Colorado River water conflicts with creative solutions. Can you speak to how important it is for Congress to continue providing this type of funding?
Sure. I want to thank you for your leadership. And to me, yesterday's signing ceremony is an example of the collaboration. And as also I want to say that Metropolitan 2 weeks ago signed MOU partnerships with the farmers in Central Valley and San Joaquin Valley to talk about how we can collaborate to address their issues with groundwater basins and how we can store water when we have it in the Central Valley to help the farmers, help us, and be able to leverage. And that's great collaboration adaptation to the changes that we're seeing. But on the front of the Colorado River is our farmers, as you heard, have been leading the way in conservation. but they can't do it alone, and they need the help financially to help. So we're working with the farmers in Palo Verde Irrigation District or Imperial Valley to implement, and we're able to actually invest a huge amount of money in on-farm conservation. But one of the things that we have done is actually work with the farmers to do what we call seasonal farming. And that means that if during the wintertime where the commodities and the vegetables they're growing is really valuable across the nation, they can farm, but during the summer where there is a huge competition for whatever they're farming, we can keep the land idle and save that water and put it away. But we need to support them financially. What we've done is through this IRA, it helped them right now in getting the funding to conserve more water so we can put back in Lake Mead and not only serve California, but serve the entire Southwest and help us come together. We're doing the same thing in the Bard Irrigation District down by Yuma, where by doing this seasonal farming, the farmers are taking some of the money that's being paid to them to line canals and be more efficient and implement on-farm conservation. And working with the tribes. The Quechan tribe by the Yuma area, we're also partnering with the Colorado River Indian tribes. We met with them last week to find new ways of farming. But I think, to me, the money that we have from the IRA is helping bridge the gap. And when you go to communities that are farmers, behind every farm, there is communities and people that suffer. So Metropolitan had invested a lot of money also in community benefits and trying to find ways to uplift people. And your funding from the IRA has been a huge help, and the Bureau of Reclamation's help has been great.
That's great. I want to make sure I make time for one additional question relative to resources. But seasonal farming is a great example. We've been working together on multi-benefit or alternative use of fallowed lands as well. But it's not just funding for severe drought that I want to highlight today. Federal investment in water infrastructure as a whole has declined about 77% since its peak in the 1970s. And although Congress has begun to rectify this by making transformational investments in water infrastructure through the bipartisan infrastructure law, we know that the funding through that measure is just a down payment. It's not the end-all, be-all. And it's critical that we continue to fund water infrastructure to help water systems become more resilient to climate change. Follow-up question to you, Adele. How can Congress best help water systems continue to drought-proof their infrastructure?
I mean, to me, the affordability question is huge. And I appreciate the bill they introduced, 3830. And for us to really, as you said, the federal help is a down payment. Most of the rates are going to be raised locally. But the biggest issue we have is there is communities that are suffering, that are working two jobs, that they can't move it, whether it's San Fernando or Compton in our region. We need to find ways to help them. So when we invest in the resiliency, we talk about $30 billion investments we need to make. How can we do it without causing hardship on the communities that are underserved or disadvantaged? And getting the low-income assistance program is going to help us increase the rates that we need to do without causing hardship on the communities that we serve.
I'm glad you mentioned the low income. I know Chairman Whitehouse spoke to the need for a low income water assistance program earlier as well, because we know who's hardest hit when it comes to these increased costs. The last question in closing is, can you speak for a moment about the value or need to not just make infrastructure investments, but for the federal government to be partners in funding ongoing maintenance and operations?
Yeah, it's critical. As part of the IRA funding, one of it is how we can reduce our dependence on imported water. And I'll give two examples. A number of communities in Southern California are on groundwater wells. And a number of them are struggling with ensuring they maintain the water quality that we need in these wells, whether it's because of PFAS or some contamination. And we have an interest in making sure those communities stay on groundwater, because if they get off groundwater and these systems fail, they will have to go to imported water, which has a huge rate shock. So using the funding, and we asked the Bureau of Reclamation to help us fund some of these communities in San Fernando, in Compton, in Fullerton, in Santa Ana, in our region, to make sure that they stay on groundwater and protect them from the contamination and provide our communities safe water. So if we can continue those investments, we not only provide resiliency and response to the drought, but also ensure that we are doing the right thing for our future and giving safe water for our communities.
Yeah. And one final thing, colleagues, for the committee to consider is a pretty simple example of leaky pipes, right? In a drought-stricken Western United States, the last thing we can afford is to lose a significant amount of water supply due to leaky pipes, which is simply a result of old infrastructure and deferred maintenance. And so if we're going to make these investments to upgrade, to modernize our infrastructure, let's not make the same mistake again. The better we maintain, the less likely we're going to be in the situation in the near future of losing a precious resource to something as simple as leaky pipes. With that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent words to end on. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Their full written statements are a part of the record. As information for all senators, questions for the record are due by 12 noon tomorrow, with signed hard copies delivered to the committee clerk in Dirksen 624. Emailed copies are also fine. We ask the witnesses, if you receive questions for the record, to respond timely, specifically within 7 days of receipt. With no further business before the committee, I again thank the witnesses, and the hearing is adjourned.